So welcome everyone. I see the number is going up slowly. We'll begin as people join. Welcome everyone to this session. We actually when we send out the invite for this session, we were pleasantly surprised to see the interest in this topic, and that's wonderful. And it's not a surprise from a topic perspective because it is the hot topic. And of course, our speakers today are very carefully chosen for a topic of this kind. We hope to make it very, very interactive. So feel free to switch on your videos. There's going to be enough time for questions, and let's make this less of a webinar but more of an interactive session. And before we begin, I want to, I'm assuming many of you know about SEAP, but I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about SEAP, which is Software Experts Association Pune. It is in very, very simple words, it's an ecosystem for Pune tech companies. It's actually a very vibrant ecosystem. We have members of various kinds, big companies, small companies, startups, enterprise companies, fintechs. As long as it's a tech company, we want to keep this ecosystem within Pune alive. And this is actually a very it's been around for very long. In fact, if you see my background and Parag's background, we've been around for 25 years. So it started in 1998, and we are now entering the 25th year. We will be celebrating this this milestone of SEAP. Initially, it was more about exports and, how do you set up a company, the compliance part, and that still is an important part that we do. But we've now expanded to way more than compliance and other matters related to government. During the COVID timeframe, we realized that, again, those topics were coming out. What is the SEZ rule and so on. So compliance is one of our important and ongoing buckets since inception. We have many other areas that we work on, which I will not do a full-fledged presentation here. But know it that whether you're a CXO, a C-suite exec level person, or you are a techie, or you're a people leader, our events are spanning across all areas. So the hope is that we carefully pick our events such that it caters to various personas. As an example, this one could actually cut across all kinds of profiles. Most of the companies that are joining in today are SEAP members. However, if you're not and you would like to become a member, please contact us. In fact, since this is a tech forum, I'll take the opportunity to talk about an upcoming architects conference that we are in the design phase right now. We are looking at it happening in January. But to get to that conference, we want this to be by the techies for the techies. So we're forming a group of people who will lead up to this event. More again, not on this meeting, but a little later. Do contact us if you are wanting to contribute, wanting to participate, and design this conference along with us that's coming up. For today's session, we have a wonderful speaker with us, Ramkumar Narayanan. Welcome, Ram. We're very, very happy to have you here.
Thanks, Vinita. Thanks for having me here.
A little bit about Ram. I'm sure you're very, very well known already, but I would like to talk about a few things about your background that will be very useful. Ram is a global leader who brings a vast experience in leading teams across product engineering, product management, UX design, product marketing. And he's led, both new market entry and turning around of existing businesses. And as part of the, leadership or leading the 4 global capability centers, or GCCs as we call it, in India, Ram has got a deep experience in setting up and growing and maturing these GCCs. And VMware is a perfect example, which is where he is currently. When we look at GCCs, right, the success of a GCC largely is led by the leader and the growth, the kind of value we bring in. And I think, Ram, you've cracked that, formula and successfully VMware in India is successfully contributing to the larger growth of the company. He's right now the VP Technology and Managing Director of VMware India, which is currently the company's largest location outside the headquarters in Palo Alto. He also serves on the board of directors of VMware India, as well as the Executive Council of NASSCOM and as a member of the Finance and Audit Committee, as well as the chairperson for NASSCOM Deep Tech Council. Ram is also a member of the Governing Council of Derby Foundation, an academic incubator. And prior to joining VMware, he served in global leadership positions at various companies, and some of them are eBay, Yahoo, and Microsoft. He actually started his career in the auto industry in US, developing software solutions for design and packaging of automotive suspension and powertrain systems. Ram is a BE Mechanical Engineering from Anna University, Chennai, and an MS in Mechanical Engineering and MBA from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Welcome, Ram, once again. And to talk with Ram, and it's extremely important that a topic like this has the right leader talking in the discussion with Ram. So we carefully picked our friend Yogesh from Pune itself. Ram lives in Bangalore. I'm just quoting that because from a SEAP perspective, SEAP is a very Pune tech organization, and we've been trying to work with Yogesh for some time. We finally have him, and Yogesh, hope to see you more in SEAP. Your tech background has been is very, very rich, and we'd like your participation even in the tech forum that's coming up in January.
Sure.
Briefly about Ram, right? He's got 2 decades of experience in computer-aided design, engineering research, software development, and management. And his educational journey includes his bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees in mechanical engineering. So throughout his career, he's got the mechanical engineering and geometric modeling algorithms as his specializations. And right now, Ram is actually very, very passionate about assisting Yogesh is very, very passionate about assisting individuals and organizations in their AI journey. So it was a perfect fit for today's talk. And he focuses on supporting them in leveraging the power of data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning, as well as natural language processing. And he's the subject matter expert who provides the guidance and expertise to help the clients unlock the potential of this transformation that the industry is going through. Over to you, Yogesh and Ram, to take this forward and give us a very, very interesting session. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinita.
Thanks, Vinita. Thanks for wonderful introductions. And welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining Friday evening. As you know, we are going to dive into a much talked about topic of these days, generative AI. And although probably some of you who are techies, core techies would know that this topic is not really that new. It has been there in data sciences, in machine learning for quite a few years. But what brought to forefront is what happened in November last year, ChatGPT. ChatGPT made it so democratic that anybody and everybody has started using it. It's of course one aspect of generative AI that it is generating text. There are other modalities also, generating images, sound, videos, and other things. But ChatGPT made it so user-friendly that non-techies have also started using it. And you know, your kids have started doing homeworks using ChatGPT now. So, and it has percolated, as I said, not to just software, but to entertainment, healthcare, finance, and every field. So, and probably you must have heard about there's a writer's strike that is going on in Hollywood. Then they are feeling threatened about generative AI. So, lots of impact of generative AI, positive, negative. And of course, we are not going to discuss Hollywood today, but more on the business at large. This being a SEAP session, will focus more of software on technical business for that matter. So the idea is, as we are fortunate to have Ram today with us, we'll have Ram speak about his way of tackling this tsunami of generative AI, focusing on probably journey at VMware. So that is going to be the first part of the session. Then I have quite a few questions to ask Ram. So I'll do that after Ram's talk. And then I'll open it up for the floor to ask questions. So that's the plan. So we'll have Ram talk about his VMware journey with respect to generative AI. Over to you, Ram.
Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you, Vinitha, for their kind introduction. Note to self that I need to cut down my bio significantly to make it easier on people to introduce me. But I think the only point here is that I think the years of working in this industry, it's been about 35 years now, has taught me that how much ever you think you know, you don't know. And so as I continue to be a student of technology. And as a technologist, I think the generative AI has caught a lot of fancy. But, just I want to preface this by saying that I'm as much a learner as you are. And every day seems to be a new day. And we'll certainly talk about a little bit. What I wanted to do was to set the context and maybe trigger some thoughts and questions. I thought I'll give an overview of how we at VMware have been thinking about this. Before I go there, let me just spend a few minutes talking about VMware itself and why this is of relevance, even not just for us, but for our customers as we think about this. So we are one of the largest providers of digital infrastructure, software digital infrastructure in the data center, particularly private cloud. And so we operate around the world in about, we have over 300,000 customers, Fortune 500 plus many more long tail customers in various sizes, which gives us the unique visibility into what is going on within the enterprise. And when ChatGPT got launched and generative AI started taking hold, it's everybody was caught in the same net to some extent, and including us at VMware. And it was a scramble to figure out, hey, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for our customers? There's a lot of enthusiasm, even both internally as well as externally, wanting more and more information. And that enthusiasm continues. Internally, we launched a generative AI community soon after, in the first quarter of the calendar year. And in the first call that we had internally, we had almost 700, 600, 700 people, right? I mean, immense amount of interest. But that interest has sustained, and it actually now has translated into something more meaningful. So let me talk about that, and then we'll come back and have a deeper discussion on the topic. So let me share my slides. I hate doing death by PowerPoint, but I figured it was an easier way to set context than to keep speaking about it. So in the words of our CEO, in the fact that data is everywhere, right? People have been talking about data as oil, and everything from the data center to the edge to various pieces of the enterprise. And today I'm going to focus on enterprise. I'm not going to talk about consumer. We can certainly go there if somebody wants to do it, but for the sake of for today's discussion, I thought I'll frame it around enterprise. And VMware as being our background being a virtualization company 25 years ago, came out of Stanford with the intent of virtualizing hardware, right? I mean, that is our background. And over time, of course, we have proliferated into other pieces of the data center and the rest of the enterprise. But what that has given us is the ability to think software first and start to understand what is the implication of software in various aspects of solving problems across the enterprise to a large extent. Now, generative AI is just yet another workload that emerged, as we thought initially, at least. But over time, I think this has given us a much more respect for what it takes to do this. And the biggest challenge that customers have, including ourselves as an enterprise, is the fact that how do you run these generative AI workloads, adjacent to their data, with the confidence of the fact that addressing, data, you make sure that your data privacy, your security, control, PII information, everything is protected. I mean, in the early days of ChatGPT, as you know, there were some stories about, in certain enterprises where people uploaded their corporate confidential data, along with, to work with, OpenAI's, or GPT-3 or GPT-4 subsequently, and that started getting their data into the public domain to a large extent. People didn't understand the implications. it's easy to say, they were wrong, but it's also, it was such early days that a lot of people didn't know what they were doing. And hence this happened. But, we have learned since then. I think as an industry, we are starting to learn. And some of this is, how do we think about ethics? How do we think about inclusion? How do we think about bias? Chat GPT and its sister LLMs have been known to hallucinate. I mean, that's part and parcel of what happens with this, next word type, generation sequence that happens, because the AI doesn't know what it's actually talking about. And it is, it's a reflection of the data with which it was trained. So there's a lot of things that go into, looking at this from various angles. Now, those of us who've been in this industry for a while, I'll date myself that I started off in the PC apps era. I still remember my 386, with the 5.25-inch floppy, and loading, applications, from a diskette, right? Or a disk or a floppy disk initially, and then it moved to a 3.5-inch diskette, and so on. I mean, the modern generation, obviously, nobody knows what the hell I'm talking about when I say, oh, we did all these things. And it was fantastic. I mean, the world was just opened up, right? Because you moved from mainframes and mini computers and Unix workstations to suddenly a democratized, PC, where you could basically, use it at work, use it at home, and start to do this. And the first wave of applications was these PC applications that came up. Those of us, again, who are old enough to remember the web era, the mid-90s was like magic. In fact, when I first saw ChatGPT, probably a day or two after it was launched, the immediate throwback effect I had was to seeing the Mosaic browser for the first time, where I could actually browse a web page in color and have it load up. And then I could actually, you'll click on links and see the subsequent pages show up. HTTP was like magic. And then there was a whole era of web application. In fact, I would argue that the web era is not done. And even today, the web is probably still a dominant interaction. Of course, you could argue that the next phase, which was the mobile applications, is really, kind of competing, which, I can't argue, but to a large extent, I think we still use the web quite extensively. So these are overlapping trends, and so on. And then so the mobile application trend was the next big phase, with the launch of the smartphone. Probably I would, this started a little before that, the semi-smartphones that showed up in the internet connection for the first time. In the early 2000s, I remember struggling with a Motorola flip phone, trying to figure out how to browse the web. But we are far away from that. I mean, today it's taken for granted that we're carrying a fairly powerful device in our pocket all the time. Or I would argue that everybody's nose is buried in it. I'm at a conference today, and this morning when I was taking my morning walk, 3/4 of the people were walking around staring at their phones as they were taking their morning walk. So I think, it has created a whole bunch of, both positive and potentially negative issues around us. Now, the third phase, the current phase, if I may, got kicked off. I think the frenzy got kicked off in November of last year. And ChatGPT, as Yogesh mentioned, the democratization of AI to a large extent. Now people could understand what this thing its potential was. And I mean, if you look at the adoption trends, ChatGPT was the fastest ever, tech offering that could reach 1 million users. It took 5 days, but today it was pointed out to me in another session that I was at that the only thing that beat ChatGPT in its speed of adoption was actually Threads, which was launched by Meta. But they had an unfair advantage because it was basically took Instagram, user base and converted it into Threads. So, Threads apparently took 48 hours or something to reach 1 million users. So overall trends, I think ChatGPT still is. It caught everybody's fancy, for text, mid-journey, for images or stable diffusion, and so on, right? I mean, there are video applications, etc. And then there's been an explosion of these as people start to understand new things coming up, new use cases coming up, new opportunities coming up, people starting to look at how do you use this and all that. So there's a fair amount of, with any technology, there's this initial burst of, enthusiasm. And then everybody starts saying, okay, now what do I do with this? and then things start to take their own space in terms of what happens. Web, I would argue, took about 10 years before, from the time, let's say the Mosaic browser and then Netscape and then Internet Explorer came into being, to the time that it was really being used effectively was probably about 10 years. Maybe AI won't take that long, given that ChatGPT took, very short 5 days to reach 1 million users. Maybe AI applications will be much, sooner adopted across the board. But, technology takes time. I mean, a lot of times we think about technology, we over-index on its capability in the short run, and then we don't adopt it fast enough in the longer run. So we'll see how these things play out. But nevertheless, I think AI and AI's intrusion into things that we as consumers and enterprises need to worry about or take advantage of is here to stay. It's not going to go away. It's very hard to put this genie back into the bottle, and maybe you don't need to. But it generates a whole bunch of new thoughts and new ideas and new, concerns, everything from regulation to ethics to everything else that needs to be thought through and understood and do that. And as we know, in the early days, soon after the launch of ChatGPT, there was a general worry that are we moving too fast and too freely, because it almost seemed like OpenAI threw this into the wild to see what happens with it and then learn from it based on users' interaction. Now, certain things work, but this has a whole bunch of other implications, and we'll certainly talk about that in terms of security and everything else that needs to be thought through. Okay, so predictive AI, this is a natural progression. You have data scientists and predictive analysts who are, ML is not new, right? It's been around for a very long time. And machine learning was starting to, is still very pervasive in a lot of the things that we interact on a daily basis, from, search to, using tools to, various other things that we do, right, on a day-to-day basis. AI, or actually machine learning, has been very much integrated as part of most tech offerings. About a year ago, we launched a deep tech report under the NASSCOM umbrella. As Vinitha mentioned, I also chair the Deep Tech Council of NASSCOM. And one of the things that at that time, this was in August of last year, we said about 40% of the companies are using deep tech of some sort, right? Today, I would say that's 100%, because if you're not using machine learning at this point, using your data, a lot of this is you're getting left behind. So whether it's warranted or not, I think people are calling themselves AI. Of course, you have to kind of do a double click to understand what aspect of AI are people really using, or is it just machine learning, or are they masquerading rules-based systems as AI? But that's par for the course. Now, generative AI has a whole set of use cases. I mean, it touches every part of a business. Again, I'm only focusing on enterprise at this point. If you think about every function in the enterprise, it's up for grabs. Now, automation is not a new thing, right? I mean, many companies have been built on the back of automation and process management. Now, the thing is, now all of that is up for grabs, right? Because with generative AI, the interaction model with data becomes a lot more democratized. You don't need a lot of specialized skills to do this, right? I mean, if you're a marketing person today generating content, which then somebody uses for your marketing activities, potentially your role is now needs to be relooked at. At worst, it could go away. And certainly this is a challenge, right? As you look ahead in terms of the jobs that need to get created, et cetera, et cetera. The one thing that, it's more a general statement, is that people seem to now resonate with the fact that, it's not generative AI or AI by itself that is a threat to people's jobs directly. I mean, of course, there will be a class of jobs that may potentially go away. But it's really somebody who's using these tools more effectively. The whole prompt engineering and the ability to write prompts that will generate the answer and the output that somebody would use. So essentially, it's really somebody who uses these tools better who will replace those who don't necessarily know how to use these tools effectively. So I think it's really now going to be still between two humans to figure out which one should take which, gets the job, right? But this touches every aspect of the company, and we can certainly talk about some use cases as we get into the Q&A session, right? Now, the generative AI pieces, obviously the core of this is the large language models, which are trained on a plethora of data. GPT-3 was 175 billion, nodes. Um, Chat GPT-4, there's always speculation on how many billion parameters that it was using. But, it seems like it is starting to exponentially increase the amount of data that is being used to train these models. Now, the question is that what is needed? Because to train them, I think ChatGPT-3 took about 15 to 20,000 NVIDIA GPUs, H100s to actually train it. Not everybody's got that kind of firepower, right, to do this, because I think an H100 retail price at $10,000. So if you're running a 20,000 node GPU cluster, that you can do the math. Those numbers add up very quickly, and that's not even counting the power, the cooling, and everything else that is needed to actually do this. So it's not something that is for the faint of heart to create these, mega large language models. But there is still hope, and I'll talk about that in a minute from an enterprise perspective, how things are playing itself out. And generative AI is expected to deliver, these numbers. Of course, you can believe it as much as you want, because the consultants are, pull out these numbers. But whatever number, you can believe what you want. But it's supposedly, equivalent of generative AI has the capability to generate about $4.4 trillion of annual economic value for across the world. Now, that's a massive number. If you look at the amount of time and effort, obviously a lot of this is classification of time, efficiency, a lot of that added into this economic value, and of course, opening up new opportunities. Now, every industry is running very hard, right? Everybody, I think the boardroom conversations in every company and every industry today is, how does AI what's the implication of AI? How do we make use of it? How can we improve our own operations? How do we provide a differentiated experience for our customers? What are new business models that are going to emerge out of using AI? And, every industry, right? I mean, is covered. Maybe there are a few that I'm not captured here, but there is no enterprise that is untouched at this point in time in terms of thinking about what to do with this. And then, the fact is that enterprises that adopt the next generation AI, like LLMs and generative AI, are 2.x more likely to increase revenue by 10%. Now, how somebody came up with that number with Accenture, this is the research that they've done. But, whether you believe it's 10% or 5% or 15%, net increase is given, right? And now everybody wants to invest in AI infrastructure. You saw some of the discussions even from an India perspective, where there's a lot of dialogue about India LLM. How do you go about doing it? We saw some of the Indian enterprises announce their strategy. We also saw recently that MeitY from the government of India is going to actually work on creating a national resource, probably a 15, 20,000 GPU cluster, that they will do it as a public-private partnership and open it up for startups and everybody else to make use of it. So, overall, everybody is very gung-ho about this. But there are key challenges in generative AI as well. The biggest one being privacy, because there is a lot of data that can be made use of from these LLMs are trained with immense amount of data. A lot of it is PII data. I mean, there's a lot of personal identifiable information, even if it's not personally identifiable. There is opportunity there to game systems, create cohorts. There's a lot of things that can be done, using these new age tools. The other thing is the fact that choice. I talked about the fact that not everybody can create these mega LLMs, right? It's just not, it just takes too much of my money and effort, not just the training part, but it's also the inferencing. Every query costs OpenAI, I forget the exact number, but it costs them a fair amount of money to run these systems. It costs Microsoft a fair amount of money to run it for OpenAI, but it also costs Google to run Bard, or for the others, Meta's LLMs, etc. Right? So that's definitely a choice issue. Are enterprises constrained for choice in terms of what they can do with these things? Second is the cost. Not everybody can afford this, like I said. And also enterprises don't need it. Now, the question that enterprises are asking is, how do we look at it from the narrower lens of the kind of problems that we want to solve? What business problems do we want to solve? And hence, what is it that we need to do from an AI perspective? The third area is performance, and we have seen this, even ChatGPT, there's been recorded problems in terms of, as they update their LLMs, there's been degeneration in terms of performance. The quality of the output, the hallucinations kick in, version to version. There's been a lot of issues in terms of how performance needs to be measured. And frankly, the world doesn't yet have a good framework on how to measure performance of these LLMs, in a scalable way. We know how to measure performance in the website, right? We know how performance of web works and how do you optimize for it, and et cetera, et cetera. Or even within networks, how do you optimize network performance? But in the case of AI, there is a lot of, still early days that we are still starting to understand and grapple with understanding how these things work, because a lot of them are black boxes. And then what does performance mean in that context? How do you measure it? How do you, record it? How do you know that you're making progress and not, degenerating in some ways, et cetera, et cetera? And then last but not least is compliance. There's huge compliance issues, right? Like we talked about, like I mentioned in the beginning, in the early days, or just, when I say early days, we're only 10 months into ChatGPT, but the first few months of ChatGPT, there have been a lot of compliance issues. Even today, you have to adhere to the laws of the land. Are these compliant with various privacy regulations around the world, like GDPR or India's new digital privacy law that's been enacted? So there's various levels of understanding of what compliance means, even within your own enterprise's compliance. How do you use data? How do you use customer data? Various other things. Are these in compliance or not? So just double clicking a little bit on the privacy front, and we'll certainly get into questions. So I don't want to, I'll just kind of fly through some of this. Private intellectual property is a big issue because these LLMs are trained using public data. And there's already cases pending in court in terms of being challenges that have come in across, these companies to say, hey, this is my intellectual property. How dare you take it and use it? And now actually, companies are now starting to set up challenges on the crawl front, so that they are starting to protect their data on their websites and various other things to prevent OpenAI and others from crawling their websites to actually extract this data, because there is an intellectual property issue in terms of what happens. Second is private data. I need to ensure the fact, I'm quoting here, I need to ensure that my private data will never be shared externally. That's the biggest worry for most enterprises in terms of, hey, how do I protect my company data and not be able to release it out by accident? And then the fact that you need complete control over the access to the AI models. If I'm an enterprise and I'm training it with my data, I need to be convinced that I have full control over this AI, not only the output it generates, but all the other implications that come with it. And do I understand this well enough? So, and here's where I come back to VMware. So we've been, talking to our customers, understanding the space, internally trying to build experiments of how we actually think about these things. And earlier this year, a few months ago, we announced something called VMware Private AI, because we were convinced that while the power of generative AI is unquestioned, right, it does a lot of things, and it has the potential to ignite business innovation for all enterprises. But we need a very thoughtful approach that balances the business gains from AI along with the challenges that come with privacy and compliance needs of the organization. So the fact that enterprises don't need these mega models, especially if they're not opening it up to consumers, but need to get more efficient in their own operations. So the premise here is, can we help our customers choose a set of LLMs, help them fine-tune it with their domain-specific data, and then deploy it within their enterprise in their private cloud, so that they can use it for their internal use. The biggest, I'll give you one example. I don't know if it's here. No, it's not. So one example that we keep hearing recurring is one of the biggest use cases that enterprises are starting to think about is, how do I reduce my customer support costs, right? For their support agents, can I use generative AI as the primary interface? Because it's easy. They are on a call with the customer who's calling in with a problem, and then there's a whole corpus of information that the support team needs to be aware of and do that. Generative AI just absolutely makes it drop dead simple to be able to query the exact problem that the customer is having and then come back with a set of, potential prescriptive guidance that the customers can make use of, and maybe over time open this up so that the customers can help themselves, or without having to have an agent in the middle. Now you may argue that there's a job here that's potentially going to be eliminated over time, but we don't believe it's 100%, right? I mean, it's you still need a human in the middle to interpret sometimes, or be able to look at the data and be able to do that, because a lot of these LLMs still depend on reinforcement learning based on human feedback. So you do need a human in the loop to a large extent in order to ensure that it's achieving the goals of what it is doing. So we believe that you need choice. One of the things I talked about was privacy. Some of the challenges is privacy, choice, etc., and then performance. So our approach that we are taking is, we are saying there's a whole bunch of emerging set of LLMs which are open source, right? And you can find them on aggregation sites that are coming up like Hugging Face, so that you get access to publicly trained LLMs that are open source, now which you can take and tune for your own use. Now, as VMware, as somebody who's working with a lot of these enterprises, and potentially all these workloads will run on our infrastructure, we are working with the various players in the environment, not just the technology providers like NVIDIA or any of the others who are in the first layer, but also with the public clouds, right? Because a lot of our workloads are going between the private cloud and the public cloud. So we are starting to work with the hyperscalers and so on, and service providers. So, we, as part of our ecosystem, we announced earlier that HCL and Wipro, would work with us very closely, as with Dell Technologies or the hardware providers. And then if you look down at the silicon layer, AMD, Intel, NVIDIAs of the world, so that we are actually trying to bring an overall ecosystem together that enterprises can be confident that they will get the support that they want for the intent that they want, and remove a lot of the uncertainty out of the equation. So I think this is the beginning. It's not by no means it's solved every problem, but it's a first step towards creating an environment that is trustworthy, that enterprises can take and use, will gives them the flexibility of choice. If they can deploy with confidence, knowing that it is supported, people who are looking at this, how do you mitigate risk, data IP leakage, model accuracy, because there'll be test harnesses, etc., that come with this, and then optimized performance. Accelerated compute. This is something that we've been working with NVIDIA for probably a few decades now. Over time, because as a virtualization layer in the enterprise, the hardware layer below us, we've always worked with most of the hardware players to ensure that their offerings are the most optimized, running on top of the VMware infrastructure. So they optimize performance, and then develop a toolkit. So one of the things is use cases, of course, is code generation. So we are also working on the ecosystem to ensure that there is a trusted, internal, verified and supported code generation model, code generation, LLM that is available to be used by internal developers within enterprises. That is actually, ensuring that a lot of the concerns and privacy and bias and various other things are mitigated as the code gets developed within the enterprise. And it is a asset. It is not seen as, you get rid of all your developers. It's really seen as how do you improve developer productivity rather than developer replacement. And that is not the intent inside the enterprise. There is more work to be done and there are people. The question is, can you actually make the developer a lot more productive, and their output to be a lot more accurate, so that they don't the cycle time on new software development can be reduced, right? And that's really the overall intent. And as part of this whole exercise, we announced a private AI foundation with NVIDIA, and the goal of that is to create a prescriptive architectural design, an integrated generative AI platform, if you may, that makes use of every aspect of the infrastructure in the most efficient way possible, right? We announced it in August when this whole stack will be available out in early 2024. And the idea is not to stop with just NVIDIA, right? The idea is to eventually have many of the providers, the various layers of the stack involved, so that from an enterprise perspective, it makes it very easy for them to start to consume this, as they look ahead. And main use cases that we are addressing with this with the private AI foundation is code generation. I talked about that. It's about developer productivity and acceleration. Contact center use cases. How do you improve the quality of the support for customers, and be able to incorporate a lot of that feedback coming in back into the operation. How do you improve your own operations, the IT operations of enterprises, significantly improve IT operations? To that end, we are starting to look at Gen AI as something that we would start using within our own products as we look ahead. And then, advanced information retrieval, document search, policy, procedure. We have experimented with looking at contract management, right? How can we help increase the throughput on contracts working with our contracts team internally, so that we trained our LLM with a lot of the corpus of contract information that we have over the years, and then looked at, can it speed up the process of contract evaluation and throughput of these contracts for the customers. So many different, these are early use cases, but I think there's still going to be a lot more as we look at. I'll stop here and then we can get into a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ram. I think you've given a lay of the land, basically overall overview of what generative AI is all about. So as I said, I do have few questions, and I've broadly categorized them into three buckets, basically: business, people aspect, people productivity aspect, and then data. Although they are interrelated, but for this session, I've bucketed them this way.
Okay.
So probably start with a couple of business-related questions. Of course, you touched upon enterprise as one aspect of usage of generative AI, but touching upon a different categorization of businesses. Obviously, in India, we have large service-based companies. They do services, they take customer problems and solve them. And we also have product companies in some sense. So do you see any differentiation of usage of generative AI in these two aspects, the services companies and product companies?
Sure.
That's...
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are common use cases that everybody can make use of. Like I mentioned, if you look at enterprises around the world, the services companies, let me touch upon services and then we'll move to product. Services companies at the end of the day are working with their customers on enabling a whole set of use cases, right? I mean, the customers have a need and a problem to solve. They're looking for help from partners to come in and help them, achieve those goals, right? So the first step there is for the services companies to really start to educate themselves on generative AI. Because, like I said, everybody's learning. And if somebody says they're an expert in generative AI, I would be a little quizzical, because this is so new and changing so rapidly that all of us have to take a little bit of a more, humble approach in some sense to say that, hey, we know what we know, and there's a lot more to, will evolve, right? So that's first step. So what I would encourage services companies is start to build expertise and talent within their organizations who understand the subject matter, at least what's the state of the art today, and be able to get familiar with how do you look at a potential set of use cases that are coming up from their customers, recurring questions. And I would imagine they will sit somewhere in this realm, right? I have a customer service issue that I want to solve. I have a lot of data. Help me come up with a solution that will help me make my support costs come down and make my agents or let my customers have a differentiated experience of solving their own problems for themselves. That could be one class of problems. There could be another class of problems around marketing. It depends on the services kind of offerings that they have. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here. I think, like I said, I think we are in the beginning of a bull run around AI, right? It may not look exactly like it does today, but I think the more you stay grounded and stay focused and stay, in this touch with what is changing, I think it'll open up massive amount of opportunity for services, because most enterprises don't have any talent internally. They have to depend on partners to help them through this process. So what I would suggest is work on it, develop use cases for yourself, learn how to use it, and then move on, right? So that's one part to this. On the product side, on product company, and of course, there's one other piece, which is their own operational efficiency. generative AI has a lot of opportunity to improve their own internal operations, whether it is their talent base, cost base, whatever it is, right? There's a set of opportunities. For product companies, these still apply, right? How do I support my customers? How do I, improve my own operational efficiency? The only additional part here for product companies is to think through how will their products leverage of generative AI from various layers of the stack, right? Let me, at the top end, the product experience, does that look very different today or in the future compared to what it is today? Most of us are used to a point and click UI model, right? We are very interactive. We ask for data. There's a lot of UX paradigm it is what it is today. Can that UX paradigm shift to a CX paradigm where the customer experience can be rethought and re-looked at, while at the same time driving their own efficiency? Because, I'll give you one example. APIs. One of the hardest things right now is API management, right? I mean, for every product company, managing their set of APIs, getting people, educated on it, keeping it updated, lifecycle management of APIs, all of these are, cost drivers for them. Generative AI has a potential to actually improve the ability to consume their APIs, right? That just making it very simple for developers to integrate and use it and be able to grow their product business, considerably. So I think there are many aspects to looking at, how product companies can leverage generative AI. And both matter, right? I mean, the product companies will be looking for help too. So that opens up a set of opportunities for services companies also to participate in that ecosystem.
Great. Yeah. There's another dimension with which we can differentiate businesses. Small businesses, startups, consultancy services companies, and then of course biggies, enterprise having big pockets, a lot of infrastructure.
Right.
Now, there could be different challenges, different way generative AI would get used. Startups probably would go for just open source models, very cheap, easy to use, no fine tuning. But big pocket guys will have their own models. They can afford OpenAI probably. So how do you see? And of course, then another dimension is a startup can then become a big guy. So there's a scalability progression that may happen down the road. So how do you see challenges with startups, small guys and big guys, and the progression part of it?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot built into that question. Let me parse it a little bit, right?
Okay.
First of all, let's talk about size of these generative AI models, because that's the core cost driver for somebody who wants to use it, start using it right away. The good news is you don't have to go to OpenAI or very large LLM for most of the things that most enterprises want to do, right? If you look at there's a number of very performant open source LLMs that are starting to hit the market. Okay? Whether you're talking about Llama from Meta or you're talking about Hugging Face as a whole suite, and they keep ranking them, right? So you can go up there and take a look and see which is the best one for your use case. Okay, so that's one. So training these open source LLMs, you don't need a 10,000 node cluster, GPU cluster to train them, right? I mean, a lot of these trainings could happen on a relatively cheaper box. I mean, maybe 2-3 GPUs kind of boxes. Obviously you have to size it based on your use case and the amount of data that you want to train it with, but you can do that, right? And then, of course, the question is inferencing, which will need to run on your infrastructure, and there's a certain amount of cost involved with it. But it's relatively cheaper than what OpenAI or Microsoft had to spend for OpenAI, or what Google had to spend for Bard and DeepMind that they did earlier, etc. Right? So they are a different class. In a very rough way, the way I would differentiate is public search versus enterprise search. Okay, public search is I used to run search at Yahoo, and so I'm quite familiar with the cost involved. It's an arms race, right? You have to build data center after data center, and you have to find the places and the number of servers. The only people who benefited from a lot of that was the hardware manufacturers. I know some of you are ex-Dell here, but I have to say that they made hay while the sun shined, right? And of course, VMware also participated in some of it as a virtualization provider. But it is unsustainable for most people. I mean, the web search was, one thing was the search aspect of building the search databases and the search models. The other piece was distribution. It was a tough game, right? So the big LLM players, they would be, there's that oft-cited interview or the interaction that the OpenAI CEO had in India, which kind of blew up, of one CEO saying, they're throwing a challenge to another CEO and all that happened.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, I think the original question that triggered that response was actually quite valid. The question was,
Correct.
can this be done cheaply by startups, and how do you make that enable that to happen? And I think there is an answer to it. And then then you have enterprise search, which require, you could take open source search and train your data on it and use it internally. And every enterprise used their own search, right? So that's a rough analogy that I would draw in parallel to how these things potentially could play out. You will still need consumer search, and that's going to require that LLM won't know what question you're going to ask, right? I mean, when we use it, when we use Chat GPT for doing something, it's like search. It has no idea what's coming at it, and it needs to generate a response based on the query coming in, and it could be on anything. So there is that huge amount of corpus of data that needs to be trained on, and will continue to grow and make that. And only a few players can actually play that. But for majority of us, it's that smaller models. Probably you need a few GPUs. In the future, probably you could train it on your high-end laptop, potentially, right? And things like that. That'll happen. So that is that element of it, in terms of cost and everything else. Of course, there are other downsides. I mean, privacy. We didn't touch upon the environmental. I saw some comments in the chat about the environmental impact of this, right? Because running these large mega models requires a fair amount of data center and consumption on power and water cooling and everything else that comes with it. Hopefully, the smaller models don't require that level of a burden on the environment that the large models will throw at it, right? So definitely those things need to be looked at. So anyway, so that's one way to frame this answer to the broader question that you had, Yogesh. And I don't know if I missed other aspects of what you had asked there.
No, I think you're fairly covered. So I'll move on to the other theme that I had in mind is the human aspect of this whole game, or the productivity aspects. You being a senior leader, how do you change the mindset now? Because earlier mindset was whatever, we had this project, we will need 10 people, different skill sets. Now, as you rightly said, you should not be worried about a person or generative AI, but a person using generative AI. Now, if you have this couple of guys who can master the art of prompt engineering, they'll probably do work of 2-3 guys. And there is a cultural shift, mindset shift that is happening, or that is needed to happen. So how does a senior leadership tackle this shift in organizations?
Yeah. So I think there's some aspects, right? Like I mentioned, the fear of the technology impact is probably higher than the actual impact in the short run. In the long run, yes. And this has been true of technology over the millennia, right? I mean, if you think about any piece of technology when it was first introduced, it replaced something else, or it had an impact on things, right? It's true for every single piece of technology that's been launched, from probably the wheel, from the time humankind invented the wheel. So in the short run, I think the first aspect is helping people understand the implication of these technologies, getting them to experience it, at least within the enterprise. Now, I don't want to get into there are various other tactics that we can certainly look at. But within the enterprise, as a leader, that's what we did, right? We launched a generative AI community. The first step. And inside VMware, one of the things we've been experimenting, and with good success, is these communities of practice. We have done this for other topics as well. So we said, okay, the best way to learn is from each other, even if it is blind leading blind in the short run. Okay, because there's always going to be the few people who take an extra effort to learn something new and share it, right? So we launched an internal, it's a Slack channel internally, and as part of that, we've had webinars, etc. And then we created a forum, right? And the forcing function of that, we have an annual conference that happens around the world. So we said, look, we were launching this private AI, and we said, can we create a set of use cases? It just could be contrived initially, but which showcases and how these technologies could be used, right? And then we opened it up. We didn't say only the R&D organization can do this, or only
Yes,
the IT
yes.
organization needs to be involved. We
No,
opened it up to the broader employee base and said, hey, what are some interesting use cases from your job that you can potentially bring forward and say that we could actually try out, right? So I mentioned this contract management piece. That's how it came up. The contract team came and said, hey, you know what? One of the biggest challenges we have to sit and read all these contracts. Then we have to make sense of it. And then we have to look for, changes that need to happen. Is there a way for us to use this tool to actually do this? So they came up with the use case. So we put a team together and said, here's an LLM. Here's all our data. Let's train it and see what happens, right? Another group came and said, hey, API management is a big challenge. How do we help? Is there a way for us to help with this? So on, right? So we didn't presuppose what answers would come up. And we crowdsourced the questions, and then we put teams together. We self-selected teams came together and said, let's go work on this problem. I would encourage every enterprise to start experimenting with this to some extent, right? Obviously, you have to put guard. One of the other things I forgot to mention is one of the first things we did as a company is we set up the guidelines of what is the right way to use generative AI, right?
no,
And
guardrails.
we set up the guardrails very early on, right, to ensure that people didn't go off track. It was not left to everybody's imagination on what. It was fairly prescriptive. It said you shall use it for this, you shall not use it for this. Here's how, for example, we said you can't use the publicly available open AI to try any of your stuff. But on the other hand, we have an AI internal ML ops team and AI team. They took publicly available open source LLMs, got them certified internally, made them available to our employee base, right? And they gave them choice. So when I presented that picture of what that enterprise private AI stack would look like, it is only after we started using it ourselves, right? It is something that VMware Enterprise is using, and we said, hey, this is useful. This is a good set of guardrails. It's a good set of technology stack. Here's how we are also using it. Now can we open it up to our customers? So we are not preaching something that we are not practicing. That is the other
Yeah.
piece that I would encourage, not just any large enterprise, but also even smaller companies. Even if you're a services company and you're going to go to your customers and say, you know what, we are going to be your best partner for generative AI or AI, you better be sure that you have tried these technologies yourself for your own operations, so that you can confidently go to them and say, hey, here's what we did. Here's our results that we saw. Here's what we learned from it. That builds trust like nothing else will, okay, rather than any hollow kind of thinking. So that's where, and then employees also look at it and go, hey, I'm trying this out. I'm getting good at these technologies. I'm getting better at writing prompts, right? I know how to use this technology so that tomorrow I can protect my own job or even get better at
Perfect. Yeah,
what I do,
yeah.
right?
Correct.
So I think this comes to democratizing and encouraging and empowering internal users to start to learn for themselves.
Perfect. Perfect. I think I was going to touch upon this job aspect, this elephant in the room, basically.
Yeah.
There's definitely going to be some impact on jobs, on some roles.
Yep.
So internal people as well as external people who are going to get hired, students or other even early professionals, they need to prepare. There's a lot of FOMO around, fear of missing out. With the senior people, they probably have missed the bus. They are not ready to reskill or upskill. So, any suggestions for people to gear up to this new technology? As you rightly said, you're still learning. That learning mentality, the growth mentality, how do you inculcate that thing is internal people as well as external people who are going to get hired?
Frankly, that has nothing to do with generative AI. I mean, if you're not learning and growing, you're anyway a dinosaur, right? And you're soon to be a fossil. Okay. I mean, I'm sorry to be harsh on this, but it doesn't matter how old you are or how many years you've been working. I mean, as we know, Yogesh, you and I can talk about now non-uniform rational B-splines, which I assume is your PhD thesis,
Yes.
which I spent 12 years, in the auto industry as a CAD CAE person. And you and I are talking AI today, right? I mean, it doesn't happen by accident. You can't sit back and say, here's what I was trained on 30 years ago, and I shall not move from that, right? It doesn't work that way. The world is not kind to you. right? So if you are not getting, as they say, 1% better on a daily basis in terms of what you do, if you're not using these tools yourself, it doesn't matter if you're young in your career or old in your career. You are you're going to, it's a, the writing is on the wall.
Yes.
So I think, this is nothing to do with technology. I mean, today is generative AI. Tomorrow it'll be something else. This world doesn't stop, right? So I think, the more people, especially as a technologist, you have to get your hands dirty. There's no choice. You may not write production level code anymore. You may not be doing, you're not going to write marketing copy, right? If you're a senior marketing person, but you have to know how these things work, right? So that you
Okay.
at least have the ability to judge, saying, hey, here's why are we not using this for these type of use cases? Or if somebody comes to you and says, here's a fantastic thing, and you should at least be able to knowledgeable enough to ask the right questions, right? And that doesn't come without staying in touch with what is happening on the market trends. So so to me, I think it's at every stage of person's career, you need to be growing.
Perfect, perfect. I think you touched upon it very rightly. Wherever you are still a student and you are always a student. Probably last question from my side, unless we'll open it up for others to ask. It's becoming monologue, I guess. So another big beast is data, the privacy aspect of it, the responsible usage of AI,
Right.
and privacy, security, all that aspect. So as everybody knows, generative AI, the LLMs are built on public data, so-called public data, whatever it can scrape, it has built on. But it still has celebrities information, medical information, legal information. And then you are using basically that knowledge to build your products. So although that knowledge is sort of public, freely available, still you are making a commercial use of it. That's one aspect of it. There are other ethical concerns. There could be derogatory comments that are built into that knowledge,
Yeah.
positive aspects, negative aspect, biases. So while using data, while using these large models, or even fine tuning your own private models as you're planning to do, what kind of cautions, what kind of guardrails and other mechanisms that you plan to suggest to all these businesses? What do you take care of basically?
Yeah, I think there's a set of areas which you rightly touched upon. I think one is, being very careful not to expose information about your customers or privately, PII type data that can potentially creep in, right, over time. Second is, I think bias is going to be a huge challenge because a
Right.
lot of the corpus of data is from a certain part of the world, so,
Yes.
things like that, right? And so you need to have models which are trained to be bias free to a large extent. I don't know if 100% bias can be removed because it's similar to a human brain. It all depends on, the biases. Everybody carries a bias. The question is, can you mitigate that bias, in meaningful ways as you
Right.
start to use this? The third is you have to be able to trust, but verify and trust the data output that is coming back. We talked about hallucination, and this is a real problem, right? So if you if you don't verify, you may land up going down a very bad path. As there have been other examples of, that lawyer who produced an argument in court, which was completely fictitious, right? And so there have been examples of these kinds of hallucinations that creep in, and a lot of it is, at the end of the day, this is just running, whatever it believes is the next word that needs to be generated as part of the sentence, right? To a large extent. So definitely something that, verification and trust building needs to happen over time. And definitely, as Ramani is pointing out in the comments, political biases kick in the various aspects, right? Language, because if it's only trained on English corpus, then in a country like India, we have so many languages, we need to be able to train these models, much better, even in the medical field, right? So there's a lot of implications. So I think, if you pick an area, you really truly need to understand what is the effect of these kinds of biases and things that come in as part of this process. The other one is security, right? See, at the end of the day, there's been an interesting set of findings. There was a good article in the MIT Technology Review on this topic. Um, in today, people use machine learning to fish on phishing attacks, right? So they try to trick us into clicking on things, making it look like sometimes the trusted source that's coming up. And they're fairly successful doing it, because even people who are savvy sometimes get fooled into not knowing what's happening. But the difference in the AI model is, how do you game it to do things that you don't want it to do, right?
Correct.
For example, embedding prompts in due to code injection on websites. Okay, one of the examples that was cited in that article was the fact that they put subliminal, basically it was white text, or the same as the background text, that was hiding inside the website. Okay, that generated the bias in the system when it ran, because it's like something that you're injecting into the brain of the LLM in order for it to get biased. Okay, so while sometimes bias can creep in just based on the corpus of data, there is willful injection of bias into the system to game it. Okay, so that when somebody comes in with a prompt, it actually gives an answer which is not something that should be giving. So I think there is very little understood on the cybersecurity front on the LLMs themselves. Okay, I mean, the question is there enough research being done? And the answer is probably not yet, on the implications of cybersecurity on generative AI and its downstream implications. I think that's a huge factor which is not as well understood and probably needs to be understood, and a lot more savvy minds need to be working on it from a research perspective to understand and mitigate. And that will take time. I mean, it's like, again, we are very, very early stages, and we are even discovering that this is a problem as we go along. But the only problem with this is, the adoption curve is so rapid that is there enough time for all these other things to catch up and do that? So a lot of things need to move really, really fast in order for it to address some of these big challenges.
Perfect. I think one point I would like to add is basically these are black boxes. Of course, we said deep learning is black boxes, but I would say these are blacker boxes in some sense, because if the answer does not come correct, what handles do you have to change that answer? When we were writing if and else previously, we could at least debug the code and then change few statements here. Machine learning, we can change some features here and there and redo the retraining the model. Deep learning, change some architecture, add some nodes, add some layers. But in LLM, what do you have in hand? Almost nothing. You can probably change some temperature, top K, top P value, and that's about it. So you just have to pray. So being very vigilant about the output is going to be the key of this.
And also what you're putting into it, right? Making sure that the data that you're feeding it is cleaned up, it's free of a lot of the challenges that we're talking about. I think that's why I think private AI, if you are using your own data, you have a lot more control over these systems. But yes, it could come in. I mean, hopefully you're only using the open source LLMs for the weight training that it has done, but you're using your own data for the rest of it. But you may not be sure. I mean, you got to test it. And that's why, that's the reason why we decided to bring together this consortium, because no one company can do this alone, right? NVIDIA can generate their CUDA and their hardware. The server manufacturers can put together the systems that are needed. There are various software players can bring in their components, but no one system can be, no one group can do this by themselves. And I think it's going to require an industry effort, and a lot of this will evolve as we look ahead. There needs to be consortia effort rather than people burying their own market differences to actually work together to fix some of these underlying problems that exist. Because for long-term adoption, all this will become super important. Otherwise, people would be hesitant to roll this out at scale.
Perfect. I think I do have quite a few questions, but I think I'll stop here and I'll let anybody. I'll open up the floor to ask anybody has any questions. You can directly unmute yourself and then start asking.
There's actually a question from Prashant in the Q&A box. Prashant, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks. So it's more about the trust and the verification aspect that that Ram spoke about. So I was just wondering, where would the prerogative of making sure that this all works well, would it lie with the companies that own the model, or would it be regulatory bodies, or the user literacy itself, or mixture of both? How do you see that playing out, Ram?
All of the above, unfortunately. Well, I think the buck stops with the people providing the service, right? It's not the LLM producer. It's really, if you as an enterprise are tuning your large language model with your data and providing it as a service to your customers, or even internally, the onus is on you to make sure that this is all kosher, right? To a large extent. Now, we didn't talk about regulatory at all. And I think there are many aspects to, there's a lot being written nowadays on the regulatory challenges. Because one of the dangers is regulating the technology versus regulating the outcome, right? Because if you regulate technology too early, it'll kill it. So technology, I mean, it's like any other tool, right? It doesn't know right or wrong. It is what it is. So what I think, there's a lot of people looking at from a policy angle and ethics and everything else. They're very careful about suggesting that government jump in early, right? There are a lot of laws already on the books. If you take India, for example, we have a data privacy law, etc. There's a lot of laws on the books already. You don't need yet another AI law, right? Unless it's absolutely required. What you really need to look at is to say, is the output creating trouble at some level, right? Is it going to violate somebody's freedom? Is it going to violate somebody's privacy? Is it being used with ill intent? Is it, even if it is by accident, is it actually causing a trouble or not? So regulation needs to be looked at, very carefully, and needs a lot of input when regulation, because as you can imagine, right, very early on, if you over-regulate it, it becomes, no, you won't be able to move forward, right? So the value is definitely there. Now the question is, how do you use it responsibly from various aspects? And then, like you rightly point out, who's accountable? Now, obviously, the service provider is accountable, right? They have to make sure that they are doing their best in terms of what is needed to ensure this happens. But as a user, you need to be equally careful, because at least now, right, for the next foreseeable future, if you are going to trust it, let's say I'm going to go out. I mean, this not just in generative AI. I mean, we had these recent incidents where people were misled by the GPS, the maps, right? We had a recent case just last week. I think, unfortunately, 2 people drove their car into a lake without quite realizing there was no road there. So there is biases in every system. Any ML system has biases. So the question is, as a user, how much do you trust it in its early days, in its infancy, or not? So I think, at a consumer level, it's even more important, because you and I are not experts at figuring out whether the output from something like a chat GPT is 100% accurate or not. But in enterprises, I think it's a little better. If you're going to use it for your support tools, at least somebody is looking at it and being able to give that feedback. So I think that human feedback loop is still very, very critical in the current days of these new tools.
Ram, I just had a follow-up, if I may.
Yeah.
So less in the context of corporate and internal usage, but when it hits the larger market,
yeah,
especially let's say images, there's an inherent possibility of social harm, with AI generated images. Example, that Trump image where he was being dragged and getting it can cause a lot of harm.
Yes.
So what do you see is happening in terms of efforts to increase literacy among lay users to be able to distinguish AI generated images and not?
Not enough. I would imagine, right? Because, all of us get all these WhatsApp forwards and we have very little way to figure out whether this is really accurate or not. I mean, you almost have to question everything that you see for the first time, right? Uh, I think educating the masses is an ongoing process. We haven't been successful in social media. I mean, we've had some example of this over the last 10 years of how social media can drive a lot of bias and changes, right? And now you're amplifying this with generative AI. I think that's a constant reminder to people that don't believe everything that you see, but that is easier said than done because a lot of times people believe what they want to believe and they have their own biases that will drive them to believe it. And these tools can help, will unfortunately amplify a lot of that to a large extent. Can you build tools to mitigate this? Maybe. It's getting harder and harder. If you look at every generation of new images, or if you look at Mid-Journey's progress in terms of the quality of the images it generates, it's getting very hard to differentiate in terms of reality and generated images. So it is unfortunately an ongoing process, and I think the more we can educate people and continue to educate them, I think it's needed. We can't stop not doing it.
Thanks.
We have anybody else in the audience who has questions?
I'll have a go. If there is no other questions. So Ram, my question was from a point of view of small and medium size enterprises. So typically for them, the AI investment, not missing the bus and the outcome to be demonstrated to the business, it's a critical decision making in terms of making the choices right now. And as it is, articulating a ROI for AI has been tricky so far. So in your view, what strategies could CXO adopt to kind of start measuring the ROI and demonstrate the business impact so that these generative AI investments could be kind of shown with outcomes and be more accurate on the investment?
Sure. Like with any technology, the technology should not lead the use case. I mean, not from an experimental perspective, but from a business perspective. At the end of the day, they really need to, people need to anchor it in a business outcome that they want to drive, right? It could be increasing revenue, it could be reducing cost, it could be improving customer experience, whatever it is. Even for a medium enterprise or even a large enterprise, it needs to be anchored in an outcome that you want to deliver that makes life better for the company or for their customers, from where they are today, right? So I think, so it starts with that. Then the question is, what's the best tool available that will help solve that, for that business outcome? Maybe it's generative AI, maybe it's something else. So I think to me, the ROI can only be achieved if you anchor it in a real business problem that you want to solve that has a measurable outcome. Once you do that, then it becomes much more natural to say, be able to point back and say, look, here's how things improved, right, in terms of output. And this is and of course, for smaller companies, it becomes even more critical because it's a resource investment that they will really need to make. So, so I think, but it could have an amplification for them, which is actually even more impactful positively than for even a larger company sometimes, because they're resource constrained to start with. And maybe this can add them, help amplify with the limited resource they have. They can do more with less.
Yeah, and as you rightly highlighted, some of the customer support or the use cases which are been traditionally coming from an automation side or kind of a bot area, you could extend that many of the measurement parameters to be able to demonstrate back to business. Is it really solving the problem or expediting the solutions?
Yeah, or I mean, they don't have the resources to invest into a lot of let's say content generation, right?
Yeah.
Where the few people they have may be able to achieve a lot more using these tools than they've been able to do with their traditional models. So again, it has to be something that they would need to get their hands dirty, get moving, try it out, experiment with it, pilot, and then see if it really gives them the output, desired output, and then, and then scale it, right, over time. It's true for anything that you.
That's true. Yeah, go
Cool.
ahead,
I
Shrikant.
think, yeah. Hi, Ram. This is Shrikant. I was just wondering whether because of this generative AI, like big corporations who have got lakhs of employees, that will impact maybe entry-level jobs or middle-level jobs.
Will it have an impact? Probably yes, right? Unfortunately, like I said, any new introduction of technologies. The one positive is the fact that, while everybody talks about adopting, the rate of adoption is always slower than what it is generally, right? Just because of, various aspects, right? And I don't want to pick
Right.
any one reason as to why this could be.
Mm.
So I think there needs to be a plan, even for the enterprise, on helping people get better at what they do. Now, you can set up some barriers in terms of, what those outcomes that you want to desire, that you want to achieve, right? You could, about retraining employees, get them better.
Right.
Could be productivity targets. It's not only about cost.
Right.
The cost can be mitigated by either having less resources or having them more productive, right, in terms of
Right.
what they do. So I'd say clearly, I think that's helpful to start thinking about some of these business metrics that you want to impact, and then saying, okay, how will this tool help me get there? Like, I go back to the question, the same answer I gave Parag, right? You need to be very clear what is the business outcomes you want. Now, over time, these tools will have an impact, because if I don't need so many developers, right, and my one developer is now amplifying and operating as a superhero 10x developer compared
Right.
to what the person could do before, then I need less number of people to get this done, right?
Mm.
But the good news is, especially in services companies, which are probably the larger employers in terms of headcount, their customers are also hungry to figure out what to do. So you may need people who are trained on generative AI abilities, which is why you see announcements from all the large SIs talking about how they want to retrain their employees with AI, right? I mean, some of the
Right.
announcements that have been made over the last couple of months.
Mm.
But yes, will it have an impact? It may have an impact on type of job roles. Certain kinds of job roles which can be automated will probably go away over time. And that's happened before also. It's not new.
Yeah.
Right? You may not need as many software developers per output or some metric. And I think we are still struggling as an industry of figuring out what those metrics are around which you will measure success or failure of how these tools will be adopted in the enterprise. I don't think there's any real danger in the short run of mass layoffs, being replaced with these tools. They are not mature enough, and they're just not quite there yet in terms of however much some of these use cases everybody is touting. I don't think, if you were to ask me, will I trust this to replace all my developers with just AI? Probably not. But would I expect my developers to start thinking about how they would leverage these tools to get more productive, write code which is a lot more performant? I don't need to do so many cycles, right? I mean, I don't, I can improve the quality of the output, or et cetera, et cetera. Absolutely.
Right.
We do need to start looking at those things.
Thanks.
Thanks, Shrikant and Ram. I think we are well on time. So I'll just hand it over to Vinita to take care of the next part.
Thank you, Yogesh and Ram. This was a fabulous 90-minute discussion. I don't know where time flew, and a couple of things. The big question when this was starting was, will the jobs go away? That was the big question on everyone's mind. But thinking, the more deeper we go in, there's so many more questions. I mean, I was thinking while you were speaking, Ram, like, will I be interested in reading an AI-generated book as much as I am, with a human author book? Will I be interested in an entire AI-generated movie? And I don't know the answer. We all are going to go through this transition of everything that we consume might be generated, and the validity of the data, like we spoke earlier. The other thought that was going on is, what will this uncover based on the data set it is using? Just like when driverless cars came in and we were talking about the rules to follow and who's accountable. Similarly, right? Will our courts get busier, or will there be new things in the practices of law and medicine that will have to be now built as an additional or an addendum to what exists today. I was also thinking if prompt engineering is going to become a full-fledged course one day. I don't know how long it will last, but that might also come in. So it's just a plethora of thoughts that were running, I'm sure, in everyone's minds as you were listening to this. So having you simplify it and, peel the layer one by one was just so wonderful. Otherwise, we take this information in bits and pockets. And I'd love to thank you, Yogesh, for moderating this so extremely well as you sifted this through the organized topic. To all our audience members, thank you. And I know it's a Friday evening. Thanks for your time. I'd like to highlight that this session has been recorded, and we need a few days, but we will put it up. You could choose to follow the SEAP page on LinkedIn. That's most likely where the recording will come, and even on our website, so we can have more people listen to this and learn. Thank you once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for being
Thank
a
you.
patient audience. Yeah,
Thank
enjoyed
you,
it.
Yogesh. Thank you,
Bye.
Ram.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Ram. Thank you, Yogesh.